Alright, I am back with another video, and today we're doing I guess kind of a general build update. I've made plenty of storm builds in the past, but builds focused on some way on things like lightning and thunder damage. I've done the Bloody Storm, I've done the Storm Song. They've all had slightly different variations on a similar theme. The Storm Song was a Storm Sorcerer Bard, the Bloody Storm was a Storm Sorcerer Rogue, which was, for the Dark Urge and all that. But here's the thing, I wanted to do a build focused on Hydromancy. For those of you that don't know what that is, it's kind of in the name, basically the manipulation of water magic, because thanks to the new additions from Mistress Spells, giving us a bunch of spells from Tasha's Cauldron of Everything in BG3, again, a mod available to all platforms who play this game, I really wanted to re-examine the Storm archetype, by making a Hydromancer, but unfortunately there wasn't enough water-based spells alone to make a single character. So I've decided to, go back and add in, lightning, ice, all that good stuff to create what I'm calling the Storm Lord. This character, in my opinion, I kind of made it as like an old war hero type deal. Somebody who went out on the sea conquering neighbouring lands and, bringing home bounties and such like that. So in his homeland, he's a war hero. In other places, I mean, I'm British, so, there might be some real-world inspiration there. Anyways, yeah, so I kind of wanted to make this kind of older, kind of knight captain type character who is based on lightning, and honestly, now with these newer spells giving us so many more opportunities and options to make something extremely fun, the new gameplay styles that come up from this are amazing. So, like I say, while this is a brand new build for the channel, it's mainly kind of looking at what the new spells added can do for some of the older concepts that we've got. In fact, I would say, looking at the spells that I'll be going over that have been added with this mod, going back and checking out my older builds and looking at them with the lens of the fact that we have these new spells, is going to make some of them so interesting. The Storm Song in particular, I almost want to remaster that video with these modded spells because it makes such a difference. But yeah, like I say, I think this is quite an interesting character. Like I say, a slightly older, more rugged character who's got a bit of pedigree behind them and is still quite, well respected in his home country, but like I say, may have made enemies elsewhere. So I think this is going to be a really fun video, and anyways, I'll stop rambling on. Let's get into it. Surprise, surprise, we're going to be kicking things off as Sorcerer with a level of Storm Sorcery. This is going to give us access to a few things. I did decide to play as a human for this build. I don't know why, but again, humans kind of just going around and taking everything over, even in fantasy realms. Yeah, it feels realistic, which is going to give us access to things like Civil Militia, giving you light armor and shield proficiency right off the bat, as well as weapon proficiency with spears, pikes, and halberds. We are going to get access to all forms of armor and weaponry by the time this build is finished. However, if you want to get started with some light armor and a shield before even level 2, which again, you kind of get really quickly in this game regardless, you will have access to that. We're also going to get human versatility, choosing an additional skill to be proficient in, and our carrying capacity is increased by 1/4. So, next up for our cantrips, you have a lot of options here, so you're going to have to pick and choose what you want, and I think I've got some of the best ones. First up is Lightning Lure, a new lightning cantrip from Tasha's, which allows us to deal 1d8 lightning damage and pull a creature 3 meters closer to you. We are going to be making a type of spell sword-gish with this build, because again, it is one of my favourite archetypes, so sue me. And Lightning Lure is going to help us with that. It fits on theme for the build, being able to conjure out a whip of lightning that pulls enemies closer, so then we can bonk them with our weapon on our next turn, because this build doesn't get extra attack. I know, but trust me, it'll make sense. Next up, Ray of Frost, classic vanilla cantrip, deals 1d8 cold damage and reduces movement speed by 3 meters. Pull them in with Lightning Lure, use Ray of Frost to make it so they can't get away. Next up, Booming Blade. If you're a tabletop player, you either love it or hate it. You strike the target with a bonus bit of thunder damage. This will become more than 0 at higher levels, so that's why this is quite powerful. And if the attack lands, the target is sheathed in booming energy, but deals 1d8 thunder damage to them if they willingly move. This build is going to have a lot of battlefield control and ways to move yourself and your enemies around the battlefield, meaning that they will have to willingly move and take that extra damage pretty goddamn frequently. And like I say, once we get to higher levels, and this cantrip is doing, 2d8 thunder damage on its own, plus the extra damage it will do when they move, move, this is one of the more powerful cantrips in the game, and it works perfectly for this build. And finally, this last spot is a pick your favourite situation, so I'll go over the options that are available to you. The one that I used in testing was Frostbite, a 1d6 cold damage attack that causes disadvantage on attack rolls with a con save. Obviously, not the best. Con saves are pretty easy to succeed for enemies in the late game. Otherwise, though, that disadvantage on attack rolls can feel really, really nice if you're in a sticky situation, especially with melee combat. However, the other on-theme options are the classic Shocking Grasp, Gust if you want to get a bit windy. Prestidigitation is a new kind of flavour thing, which would let you wash yourself off with water. Thunderclap, obviously, a thunder spell, creating a sound around you. That's another con save, though, might not be the best. Sword Burst would be a slightly better version of that if you want to lean more into the swordplay side of things, which is a dex save instead. I would say all of those work pretty nicely, but I kind of like Frostbite the most for this one, but honestly, pick whatever you like for your last cantrip. Next up, spells. Obviously, we're going to take some pretty decent options here. Level 1 sorcerers and wizards get a ton of amazing spells. So, first up, Chromatic Orb. This is just going to be a one-stop shop for all the different damage types that we're going to want to deal. Thunder, cold, lightning, it's all here. The reason I'm going with Chromatic Orb and not something like Thunder Wave or Ice Knife or whatever is, like I say, the versatility is there. We are going to be making use of cold, lightning, and thunder in this build because that just makes the most sense, as well as eventually the water attacks that we'll get later dealing bludgeoning damage. And unfortunately with Sorcerer having limited spell selection, I did need to kind of pick and choose things that have more general utility rather than just trying to pick up every single spell of all of those elements. So Chromatic Orb made the most sense. Your other option is Chaos Bolt, but you do unfortunately have less control of what element you get, so I do think Chromatic Orb is going to be more reliable overall, even though Chaos Bolt does have the opportunity to potentially do extra damage, and yet an option, a 1.5% chance to cast another Chaos Bolt for free. Again, not having control of the damage type doesn't really work for me, so we're going to stick with the vanilla Chromatic Orb. What isn't vanilla is Absorb Elements, taking half damage from the next elemental attack to target you, and deal an additional 1d6 of that element type on your next attack. You've weathered every kind of storm to get where you are today. You are the storm itself. You can take a bit of lightning, thunder, or whatever here, and then dish it back later. And you can even deal fire damage and such with this too. It's just an all-around great cantrip that's reaction-based spell, I should say. That's brilliant for tanking, in a similar vein to something like Shield. Obviously, our subclass is Storm Sorcery, as I said, which is going to give us access to Tempestuous Magic. After we cast a level 1 spell or higher, we can fly as a bonus action until the end of our next turn without receiving opportunity attacks. This is an amazing way to be able to maneuver across the battlefield and get into position whether we want to be in melee or at range, depending on what we're going for. This is a great feature to have right away at level 1. We also want to start with Sorcerer as well for the Constitution saving for proficiency, because we do have a lot of powerful concentration spells with this build. And then next up, our ability scores. They're going to look a bit weird, but trust me, it makes sense. We're going to have our dexterity at 14. We are going to be using this for attacks later, but trust me, with the amount of stuff we're going to be stacking, it's not really going to matter. So yes, while we are going to be swinging a sword with this build, a lot of the time we're going to be attacking through spells, like for example, Thunderous Smite or Booming Blade, which will use our spellcasting ability modifier, so it's not a huge deal. But we do have ways of fixing this later if you really are worried about it, but trust me, we'll have sources of advantage and such like that. A 14 in dexterity is going to do us absolutely fine. Constitution is at 16. Obviously, we are going to be concentrating, and we're a melee spellcaster. We do want to be a bit beefy at least. Strength and intelligence are at 8. We don't need them. Wisdom is at 10 because it's better than 8. And charisma is going to be at 17. We are going to be bumping this up with a half feat later, and it is obviously our main spellcasting stat for everything that we're going to be doing. Next up, skill proficiencies. I have gone with the folk hero background because, again, with the backstory that I came up with, it does kind of make sense. This is going to give you animal handling. You are on a ship quite a lot. Maybe you do have a parrot. Maybe you do fall into that stereotype. Or maybe you have some sort of royal guard dog or something. Either way, animals kind of like you. So that's probably good enough for most people. And also survival. You survive a lot of trips out on the seas, like I said, and also in neighbouring countries. You need to know how to survive. As well as we are going to be picking up insight, intimidation, and persuasion. Intimidation is going to come from our human skill proficiency, and persuasion and insight will come from our sorcerer proficiencies. So yeah, that's level 1. Next up at level 2, we're going to take this multi-class dip straight away because there's some things that I want. Now, my original version of this build did actually go all the way to level 12 of Storm Sorcerer, so that we would have access to level 6 spells and, like, Chain Lightning, which, you know, was cool to start with, but then I got this little idea in my head that kind of fixed some issues that build had, namely its tankiness, and as such, this is where this kind of warrior Storm Lord type thing was born, because we're going with Paladin. Paladin is going to give us access to a bunch of things. Martial weapons, everything up to medium armor as well, which is nice. So yeah, and we are going to be wearing medium armor with this build, which is what we want. And also we're going to gain access to our subclass. Now, what do you think might work for someone who goes around conquering other nations to bring back their spoils? How about the Oath of Conquest? That's right, a new modded subclass from 5e that has been added to all platforms thanks to the in-game mod manager. The Oath of Conquest calls to paladins who seek glory in battle and the subjugation of their enemies. Is it enough for these paladins to establish order? They must crush the forces of chaos. I think this guy would absolutely see himself as some sort of vengeful crusader, some sort of crusader of righteousness who is going to these other places to bring order to them by conquering them for his home nation. So, you know, there's just some fun stuff going on there. I'm sure there's some Forgotten Realms lore that would fit this dude absolutely perfectly, but I don't have time to do all that. I'm here to make builds. But Oath of Conquest is going to give us some fun stuff, namely our chosen adversary action. Mark an enemy as the focus point of your zealous pursuit. You have advantage on attack rolls against the target, and when you hit them with a melee attack, they might become frightened until the end of the next turn or when they take damage. It's a wisdom saving throw used as a bonus action. So overall, you're trading out the kind of overall, the kind of utility of the Abjure enemy feature from Vengeance Paladin for being able to frighten enemies in the same kind of breath. Basically, because, you know, there's that kind of bug that never really got fixed with Vengeance Paladin, where if you cast Abjure enemy on yourself, you gain advantage on everybody, whereas this is only advantage on one creature. But I do think Oath of Conquest fits this build better lore-wise, but if you really want a power build, go with Oath of Vengeance and yada yada yada. Otherwise, I love Chosen Adversary here, and again, just Oath of Conquest feels so right. In fact, I'll actually go over the tenets of Oath of Conquest in case you're not familiar. The Oath of Conquest Paladins abide by the following tenets. Douse the Flame of Hope. It is not enough to merely defeat an enemy in battle. Your victory must be so overwhelming that your enemy's will to fight is shattered forever. A blade can end a life, fear can end an empire. And that's why you are the storm that is approaching. Does anybody else hear that music? Anyways, if I actually remember to edit that in, I'll be impressed. But yeah, so... But like I said, that kind of fits the vibe. Like, again, imagine, like, you're a neighboring country living in fear of this army of warlords that comes from this other place that is so deadly. And then in the distance, you think you see a single ship on the horizon, and the storm clouds rolling in behind it. That is conquest through fear, baby. That's why I love builds like this. I won't go over the rest here because, you know, you can read it for yourself. It's been on screen. Pause the video if you want to hear. But that was kind of what I really wanted to get into because it just feels so right for this build. Let's keep going. At level 2 of Paladin, you're going to gain access to Divine Smite, as well as Paladin spellcasting and a fighting style. For your fighting style, we're going to be picking Dueling, as we are going Sword and Board for this one. Next up, for your spells, you gain access to 5, and these are the 5 that I'm going to pick. Obviously, we're going with Thunderous Smite, being able to push our targets 3 meters away and possibly knock them prone while dealing an extra 2d6 thunder damage, costing our action and our bonus action, and it's a strength save, which is a pretty decent save to make most of the time, especially against humanoid enemies, which you're most likely what you're going to be pushing and knocking prone with this spell. Basically, it's either this or Booming Blade most of the time. You probably, if you don't want to spend the spell slot, you are going to be using Booming Blade a bit more, but hey, you can't not take Thunderous Smite on this build, and it definitely has its utility. In the same vein, since we're an Oath of Conquest Paladin, let's bring Wrathful Smite, dealing 1d6 psychic damage and possibly frightening the target with a wisdom saving throw. I think this one also works quite well, except for the fact that this is concentration, so if you're concentrating on one of your powerful sorcerer spells, you're not really going to be wanting to throw this one out too much, but hey, it's flavorful, so we are going to take it. We're also going to be picking up Command, Compelled Duel, and also Heroism. Command for obvious reasons. I mean, again, we are a commander, we'll probably be commanding our own ship, kind of makes sense to be able to do that magically as well. Compelled Duel, because again, honourable combat in a weird way again. You want to completely trounce a foe, so you challenge them to a duel, make them fear you with Adverse Adversary, or whatever it was called. I'm already forgetting the name, that's bad. And then, you know, just fight them head on. Pretty fun ability. And then Heroism, because it prevents us from becoming frightened. We can't feel fear, we are the fear. And that's all for Paladin, unless you want to go to level 3 and forego some extra spell slots later on and some extra spell choices. If you went to level 3, you'd get the following. Guided Strike, you can gain a plus 10 bonus to an attack roll, which is pretty nice, as well as Conquering Presence, allowing you to make enemies around you fearful, and affected creatures need to repeat the saving throw. Basically, it's a fear aura, as well as things like Armour of Agathis and Command as well, so you can get some pretty cool things out of that if you want, but I'm quite happy to go back to Sorcerer here and just get the most out of our Sorcerer levels, because again, this is mostly a Sorcerer build. Maybe you were a more adept fighter in your youth, but nowadays you've decided to let the magic do the talking in your old age, where your bones creak a little bit more. So, with level 2 of Sorcerer, you're going to be getting access to meta magic, so being able to do all the usual shenanigans that come with that. And because we did do some shenanigans with leveling up with Paladin, we do gain slightly more spell slots than we normally would have by level 2 of Sorcerer, even though we're totally level 4, so, you know, we get level 2 spell slots a bit earlier, is what I'm saying. But we do also get another spell, and I know we've got things like Ice Knife, Witch Bolt, Thunder Wave, Featherfall even would make a lot of sense here, but unfortunately in my testing, well, I say unfortunately, it's still a good spell. Shield is the best overall option. I do find that even with our really high AC, sometimes Shield is what you need to survive a deadly encounter. So I do think even with Absorb Elements and all that, meaning our reaction is a little bit busy, we do like having Shield on this build. So I personally recommend taking it. But if you think you can slug it out, grab Frost Fingers. That could be a fun spell. If you want to lean even into the psychic aspect a little bit with the fear, there's things like ID Insinuation or something like... There was another one as well. Maybe not at this level. There's just so many different things you could pick here, but I am going to pick Shield as it is the generally best option. As well as we're going to be able to pick up some meta magic, and say it with me, we're once again picking up Twinned Spell, because of course we are, it's one of the best meta magics ever. And the next one is up to you. I'd recommend that if you want to keep your crew safe from your own storms, you're going to want to bring Careful Spell, basically making it so that allies automatically succeed saving throws against spells that require them. So for your allies, your spells will be a little bit safer, because we do have a lot of area of effect spells. Oh boy, we have a lot of area of effect spells. Next up, at level 3 of Sorcery, you gain another meta magic option, and say it with me, yes, we are taking Quicken Spell again. I mean, being able to spend 3 sorcery points to cast a spell or cantrip as a bonus action cannot be understated in its utility, so we are going to be taking that here. We also gain access to level 2 spells, and by golly, you have some options. However, we are now finally going to be picking up the main weapon for this build. Up until now, you could have been using any versatile or one-handed weapon, but the main weapon I want to use for this build is one that I've shown off before. It is the Moonblade from Summon Moonblade. Summon a +1 magical flaming or chilling short sword that sheds a bright light in a 3-meter radius. It deals bonus fire or cold damage depending on what you pick, increases your armor class by 1, and grants you resistance to fire or cold damage depending on the one that you chose. Obviously, because we are the Storm Lord and ice comes from the storms as well, we are going to be summoning the cold version of this blade, giving us all of these extra buffs, no concentration required. It's kind of like Flame Blade in that sense, and we just get to go absolutely crazy. Speaking of, I am also using a mod that adds the 1 D&D spell list revisions, adding some new spells to the Sorcerer spell list that are already in the game, like Flame Blade and such like that, just to give us a bit more variety. So if you wanted to pick up Flame Blade here, you absolutely could, which could be a fun build idea in the future. But Summon Moonblade overall is going to be better for us. This can be upcast for a better weapon bonus. Overall, it's just great. And like I say, it's a short sword, so it is going to use our dexterity, which again, slightly on the lower side, but with all the sources of advantage and all that and the extra power that we get, I never ever found this to be a problem, especially when we're mainly just using this for the passive buffs that it gives us, as well as being a way of using Booming Blade. So yes, overall, this thing is absolutely amazing. At level 4 of Sorcerer, we get to pick another cantrip. And again, so much to pick from. There's so many options here. But I am going to be taking the elementally correct option, and we're going to go with Shocking Grasp. Next up, you do get to pick another level 2 spell at this point. Now, obviously, I think a lot of people would be saying, take Misty Step here. I'm not taking Misty Step here. Even though it is the most thematic thing possible for this build, it makes so much sense to take it. There's just other things that I want a little bit more than Misty Step, so I'm sorry, we're not taking it here. There are a ton of other options though, especially amongst some of the new stuff that we've got. Silvery Barbs can be really nice. Snillox, Snowball Storm. That's a mouthful. It is also a really fun cold damage spell. There's also the other thunder spells, which I don't feel like we have enough of yet. There's things like Shatter here that I think could be really, really fun. Thunder Wave is also a great spell for being a melee spellcaster, so there's a ton of different things you can grab here that I think would all make sense. I am going to be grabbing Shatter, though. I just like it the most here. Anyways, now we get to pick a feat. With this feat, we can now use the mod that adds the Tasha's feats, again, available to all platforms, to be able to pick some of Tasha's feats, including Fey Touched, which is going to allow us to bump our charisma up by 1 and teach us the Misty Step spell that we get to cast once per long rest for free, and then the rest of the times we cast it, we can use our spell slots. Ha! Hit you with the old bait and switch there. So yes, now we get to round up our charisma, get a free Misty Step spell, and another spell from the Divination or Enchantment School of Magic. Now, unfortunately, we do kind of have a lot of these spells already. I would have chosen Command or Compelled Duel otherwise, and that's what I did before I got the Paladin levels in, so those are kind of gone. Dissonant Whispers would make a lot of sense here. It's another psychic damage spell that kind of can play into the fear aspect by causing fear, so if you want to go with that, you can. Hex and Hunter's Mark are both great options. However, our concentration will probably be spent better on other things in the long run. So if you really just want a roleplay option, Speak of Animals can be really, really nice, especially with our high charisma. Tasha's Hideous Laughter could be another psychic attack. I think overall I will be taking Dissonant Whispers here. I did take Hunter's Mark in my testing, but I just found that I was never really using it. So I think I'm just going to go with Dissonant Whispers here, because I do think that would be the better option overall, especially when we do have a lot of concentration-based spells in this build. Dissonant Whispers is going to just do the job in general, and it's just, we don't often get this spell on a sorcerer, so let's take it. Next up, at level 5 of Sorcerer, we get level 3 spells, and obviously you have a ton of options available to you here. We've got the classics, we've got Lightning Bolt, Haste, which I actually do recommend for this build. Probably would grab the Darkfire Shortbow for it though, but it is here if you want it. But then there's a bunch of new stuff, and as I said, I wanted to focus on the Hydromancer aspect of this build more than anything, so we're going to start picking up water spells. We have 3 options available to us here from level 3. The first one, which is the first one I'm going to be taking, is Freedom of the Waves. This deals 2d8 bludgeoning damage and calls forth a deluge of seawater that can knock enemies prone. It's a big AoE attack with a strength saving throw, knocks enemies prone and deals a decent chunk of damage, and has decent upcasting. But of course, this also creates a watery surface, which, as you all know, synergizes very well with lightning and cold attacks. A cold attack will turn the whole thing into an ice rink, making it so enemies slip over and fall prone even more. And the lightning will electrocute the water, meaning that they take passive damage each turn. There's so many different ways that this can be used, so we're absolutely taking it here. I would even suggest that if you find you've got a lower level spell here that you're not making a lot of use out of, maybe you prefer something like Shield to absorb elements 99% of the time, you can swap that out here and instead take another spell from this list. I will probably do that here, in which case I'm going to be grabbing Tidal Wave. This allows us to deal 4d8 bludgeoning damage and conjure a wave of water that can also knock enemies prone. Now you may be thinking, well, taking this and Freedom of the Waves seems a bit redundant, and you could be right. However, I did find in my testing that the way these attacks are set up is fairly different, and you are going to want, especially in like slightly tighter areas, one spell over the other, because the AoE will be a different size, and you do have to think about your allies in some cases. So we're going to grab Tidal Wave here, because come on, I want it. I want the new things. These are all very fun. Next up, at level 6 of Sorcerer, we get the goodies from Storm Sorcery. We're going to gain resistance to lightning and thunder damage, which is amazing, as well as the ability Heart of the Storm. Whenever we cast a level 1 or higher spell that deals lightning or thunder damage, it causes a small localized storm, and all enemies within 6 meters take an additional 3 lightning or thunder damage, depending on the type of spell cast. This is an amazing feature. It's more damage. Absolutely perfect. We also get 6 new spells. We gain access to Call Lightning, Sleet Storm, Gust of Wind, Create or Destroy Water, which is a little bit less relevant now, Thunder Wave, which is why we didn't need to take it earlier, And Maelstrom, a level 5 spell. So obviously we can't use it at this point, but when we have access to level 5 spell slots, we're going to get to use Maelstrom, one of the other water spells. It deals 66 bludgeoning damage, it requires a concentration, and it creates a raging storm that any creature who is in it will be pulled to the center if they start their turn within it. And creatures starting their turn in the area will take that 66 bludgeoning damage, and the area is considered difficult terrain. Extremely hard to get out of once it's set up, and is probably going to be the main concentration spell for this build. We're going to set up some water, most likely electrify or freeze it, then use Maelstrom to keep everyone in the middle, making it so they can't move. Be careful though, because we can get sucked into the Maelstrom and take this damage ourselves, which can not only end our concentration, but also just kind of end our life. So at that point, you may want to definitely have your other ranged spells available. But of course, when we don't have this up, we still have all of our melee goodness to go with. Speaking of, let's have a look at our other options for spells. We have so many here, but another way of getting around the map that's going to be really fun and thematic for this build is Thunder Step. Thunder Step is going to allow us to teleport ourselves and up to one adjacent ally, so something a bit similar to Dimension Door, to a place you can see. And a thunderous boom damages all creatures within 3 meters of the space you left for 3d10 thunder damage. The only caveat being that the ally cannot be larger than medium, so really for us in BG3 that's not going to be a problem. I will quickly point out one other water-based spell that you can see here, that is Water Walk. It's a ritual spell that lasts until your next long rest. It doesn't say ritual here, but it is, that allows you to harmlessly walk over liquid surfaces, including acid, lava, caustic brine, mud, water, deep water, running water, electrified surfaces, grease, and sewage. Basically, if it's liquid and it's on the floor, you are completely immune to it. This would be a very useful spell to have, but most of the time, we're only going to be dealing with electrified surfaces and ice. And obviously this spell doesn't cover ice, but the electrified surfaces will be the main thing, so if you don't want to take a certain ring that you've seen on this channel before later, then Water Walk may be worth the spell slot for you. Otherwise, I do have other stuff that I would rather pick for now, like the aforementioned Thunder Step. Next up, at level 7, we do have access to level 4 spells at this point, and while there are some good ones here, I do think we do need to pick up Lightning Bolt here. It is the classic 8d6 lightning damage in a line. How could I not take it? It is the classic, and it's a perfect ranged option for blasting everyone who's come into our Maelstrom, so we're definitely going to want that Lightning Bolt. At level 8 of Sorcerer, we do still get to pick another spell, and you have a few options here. Obviously, the classic counter spell is always good, but not really what I'm looking for on this build. Ice Storm is great, but we've seen this a million times before, so let's grab Storm Sphere. It's another concentration-based spell, but it deals 4d6 lightning damage plus 2d6 bludgeoning damage. You summon a sphere of electricity. On each turn, you can shock an enemy standing within 18 meters of the sphere for 4 to 24, my apologies, lightning damage with a bonus action. So basically, this is kind of one of those spells where you cast it, it uses your concentration, and you have to use a resource to reactivate it each turn. A bit similar to Witch Bolt, except this only uses our bonus action, not our action. Creatures within 6 meters of the sphere have disadvantage on perception checks and possibly take 2 to 12 bludgeoning damage at the start of their turn, and this area is also considered difficult terrain. So it depends on what you want. Do you want Maelstrom or do you want Storm Sphere? These are both great, but if you feel like having this and Maelstrom is a bit overkill, then feel free to take something else. I did try to use haste in my testing, but I did find myself casting other things more often than not, so if you really do want haste on this build to essentially have extra attack for both your weapon and your spells, I would suggest grabbing the Darkfire Shortbow, not having this on your spell list directly. But yes, we are absolutely going to take Storm Sphere for now. We also do get another feat at this point. I would recommend just taking an ability score improvement, and you do have a choice. If you feel like your power level at this point with your spells is pretty decent, then you don't actually need to bump up your charisma to 20 here. And if you really wanted to, you could just grab the Birthright Hat to do that anyway. So if you feel like other things like your dexterity or your constitution are more valuable, I can totally understand. In my testing, I did use 20 charisma, so that is kind of what I can recommend for this build. However, I do feel like Constitution and Dexterity are both valid options to bump up by 2 here, so I would absolutely consider them. It's totally player's choice here. Do whatever you like to do. I'm just going to go with what I did in my testing. At Sorcerer at level 9, we're going to gain access to 5th level spells, and there are some pretty big, heavy hitters here. There's not too much from the new, from our new spell list that I would say works 100% for this build, but we do have the addition of Fire Shield from the 1D&D revisions. This would allow us to summon a aura of, for us, cold ice damage, which will damage anyone who attacks us within a 3-meter radius and can provide resistance to fire or cold damage. So if you want a little bit of extra retaliation for those who come near you and just give yourself this intimidating aura of frost, you can absolutely go for Fire Shield here, and I totally recommend it. Otherwise, you've got a few other options as well. Ice Storm, Cone of Cold. What else do we have here that would be good? Like I said, there's all the usual stuff that would also work. Fast Step, if you want to do some more teleportation shenanigans. There's a ton of different things you could do here. I would recommend probably just sticking with one of the classics, though. And, like, you could take Water Walk as well at this point, if you feel like at this point in the build you think it would be decent to have just in case. It's entirely up to you. I found grabbing Cone of Cold just for a non-concentration big burst of damage. Yes, it is a con save, but it's still a lot of good damage that's just great to have. But Ice Storm, that is a dex save, could also be good. So it's a pick your favorite type situation here. I would say I might go with Ice Storm actually rather than Cone of Cold. I feel like it has slightly more utility with that dex save and the split damage with bludgeoning and cold, because again, bludgeoning is kind of our thing with the water damage as well, so it kind of fits the vibe of the build more, but it's entirely up to you. And for our final level of Sorcerer, we're going to get some goodies. Namely, we're going to be gaining another cantrip. I do believe we also gain a subclass feature. No, we don't. So we get a cantrip. It's up to you entirely what you want to pick here. It really doesn't matter. There's things like Mind Sliver, which can deal psychic damage and give a penalty to saving throws, which is actually really good, and it's an int save, so it's hard to save against. I would actually recommend this here, because again, psychic damage kind of fits the vibe of the fear thing that we have going on from those Oath for Conquest levels and the Fey Touched feat. And again, that penalty to saving throws, meaning they're more likely to slip on our ice, they're more likely to fall prey to things like Maelstrom. You know, it could just be really easy, and again, with that psychic damage not often being resisted, and 3d6 psychic damage is nothing to sneeze at, and that intelligence saving throw is something a lot of creatures aren't going to be making, this is a good overall cantrip to have. Next up, we do get to choose our final spell for the build, and it really is a pick your favorite situation. Whatever here looks good to you, take. I mean, I would say Cone of Cold. Obviously, I've gone through all the other options here. I think I did have Taste from this point on my spell list in my testing, but otherwise you can just kind of take whatever you like here. Anything that looks good to you, just grab it. We have so many new toys to play with. Experiment, have fun, do whatever works for you. This is your build at the end of the day. Change it up however you like. Next up, we do actually get another meta magic option at this point. I would recommend Heightened Spell. Heightened Spell is going to make it so that the targets of spells that require saving throws have disadvantage on their first saving throw. So overall, we do have a lot of saving throw spells. This can help us with that. And that is the build. Overall, what you're going to be getting out of this is, well, damage out the arse for starters. You're going to have access to 3 amazing damage types primarily, that being cold, lightning, and thunder, as well as massive amounts of bludgeoning damage. Not to mention the huge amount of battlefield control you're going to have with electrified and ice surfaces coming from your powerful water spells that deal massive amounts of bludgeoning damage. You've got attacks that work at all ranges, you've got AoEs, you've got saving throws, you've got attack rolls, you've got line attacks, you've got melee attacks, and you've got battlefield control as well, like I said, between the water stuff, but also psychic things to inflict fear, compel duel to force enemies to come to you, same with command. You've got sources of advantage, you've got powerful cantrip attacks, we've got that 2d8 thunder damage plus an extra 3d8 thunder damage potentially. You've got movement options, you even got a little bit of healing, not much, don't really look at that. And again, we even have psychic damage in here. This is just a really fun build. You are the Conqueror of Nations, the Storm Lord. I'll quickly summon the Moonblade so that you guys can have a look. It lasts 100 turns, which is going to be more than enough for most combats. And again, we're summoning the Cold variant. So here we go. Cantate indeed. Which again allows us to use Booming Blade, which does a pretty decent chunk of damage. And of course, we also gain access to Divine Smite. So, if you really need to just kill something, you can with a pretty decent chunk of damage. Let me just fix the camera here. There we go. So yeah, that is the build overall, and I gotta say, I absolutely love it. It's still playing on that same Storm archetype that I've gone over a few times before, but again, just having access to all of this new stuff makes the build so much more flavorful, and I think you'll definitely tell from the combat footage just how impressive this can really be. For your equipment, let's look at what we've got here. A lot of this is fairly standard stuff, no modded equipment here, this is all vanilla. So this part is fairly easy. Obviously the only modded thing here is the Moonblade itself, which deals 1d6 slashing damage as a base, with an extra little bit of slashing as well, and some extra cold damage on top. Again, upcasting the spell adds more to that cold damage. It's a +1 weapon by default, and again, giving that +1 to armor class and resistance to cold damage is great. We're coming out of this build with a total of 22 AC, which is amazing. Again, this is using our dexterity because it is a light finesse weapon, but otherwise, you know, if you want to bump up your dexterity, like I said, you absolutely can. Or obviously there's other ways of doing that, like the gloves of Nyx, if you want to put those points into something else. Next up, I do recommend using a shield for this build. Again, just having a lot of AC as a base is a great way for your melee spellcaster to not be, you know, dead on arrival. So the Shield of Devotion is great, giving us an extra level 1 spell slot, which is amazing. That's more shields. I mean, the spell, not the shield. As well as being able to use Shield Bash like all shields, and gives you the ability to cast Aid at level 3, giving you an extra 10 HP, which, I mean, heck, 10 is better than none. That puts us at a solid 100 when all is said and done. Obviously now, as you can see, we're packing that with the 3 resistances that we have by default. That's pretty nice, I will say so myself. Next on, moving on, we have the Gibbous of the Worshipful Servant for our helmet slot. At the start of combat, the wearer gains momentum equal to their charisma modifier. Momentum gives you a little bit of extra movement per remaining turn of this effect. So with our charisma modifier being what it is, that being a solid 5, we're going to get 5 turns of momentum, allowing us to move around the battlefield really quickly, which is awesome for us. That means we're going to be able to get into melee or ranged kind of zones wherever we want to be on the battlefield right at the start. It also gives us advantage on concentration saving throws. Honestly, this is probably the best piece of headgear for this build, so I would absolutely go with this 100%. But in the other game, the Diadem of Arcane Synergy is also really good. Whenever we inflict a condition, which we'll be doing pretty much 99% of the time, because even something like Booming Blade inflicts a condition called Booming Energy, so we can use that here. Which will trigger Arcane Synergy, which allows us to deal additional damage with our weapon attacks equal to our spell casting ability modifier. A great option for this build, 100%. Next up, for our cloak, we have the Thunderskin Cloak. Whenever a creature with Reverberation deals damage to the wearer, the creature needs to make a Constitution saving throw or become dazed. Yes, we are using Reverberation in this build, and dazed is an amazing condition because it makes the creature have disadvantage on Wisdom saves, which can help with our fear effects, and they cannot take reactions and lose a Dexterity bonus from their armor class, so they just become very much weaker overall for just attacking us. I mean, heck, you inflict fear just by being around other people, and you command respect by even if they dare to attack you, their fear basically becomes their downfall. It's really, really cool. I love this effect, and also love the fact that the cloak itself is kind of tattered in a way, like it's old, which I think just looks really cool, like for this type of character, so I think it's perfect. Next up, for our armor, we have the Armour of Agility. This is just the most solid armor for this build overall. It's one of the best dex-based armors in the game. It comes with a base 17 AC and adds our full dexterity bonus to our armor class, as well as you do not have disadvantage on stealth checks. But in addition, which is something I don't think a lot of people take into account, is this gives you a +2 bonus to all of your saving throws, which is really, really nice, especially for us, a spellcaster, with concentration saving throws. Yeah, you're never dropping concentration with this one, that's all I'm going to say. But of course, this is a late game armor, so for the early game, I recommend Voluminous armor, kind of playing into the Paladin side of things a bit. Whenever the wearer deals radiant damage, Divine Smite, you cause a radiant shockwave, inflicting Radiating Orb in a 3-meter radius. Radiating Orb makes it so the entities have a -1 to attack rolls for each remaining turn, and also shed a bright light in the area around them. Basically, again, another way of just making you harder to hit, but this is basically just here to be a decent medium armor in the early game, giving you a total of 17 AC when all is said and done with your dexterity modifier being at 14. So overall, it's just a solid set, but you definitely want that Armor of Agility once you get to later levels. Next up, the Gloves of Belligerent Skies. Whenever the wearer deals thunder, lightning, or radiant damage, you inflict 2 turns of Reverberation. We do all 3 of these damage types very consistently. So Reverberation is going to allow us to make the affected entity have a -1 penalty to their physical saving throws per remaining turn. And whenever the entity has 5 or more turns of Reverberation, they take an additional bit of thunder damage and fall prone. Creatures immune to thunder damage cannot receive this. Overall, very, very powerful effect. It's just a big buff to those physical saving throws, which again, you'll remember a lot of our water spells do rely on strength saves, which will be able to make our enemies pretty much useless at doing between Dazed and this. Like, as well as the fact that since we deal thunder, lightning, and radiant damage pretty much consistently, this is always going to be up. Heck, even the electrocution status effect, which comes from the electrified water, will trigger the reverberation from these gloves, because it technically counts as us doing lightning damage over a period of time, so this will just always be up. If you've seen my previous lightning and thunder damage builds, you know how this piece of equipment works. It is just broken. And it still is to this day. We're going to be combining this with the water sparklers. Whenever the wearer stands on a water during combat, it becomes electrified. So now we don't even have to use a lightning attack, wasting an action or a spell slot to do so. It just automatically becomes electrified. So this is anything from things like Water Walk or from Tidal Wave even, or Freedom of the Waves. They will both make these water surfaces, or just create or destroy water, to be able to electrocute. And if we start our turn on an electrified surface, we gain 3 lightning charges. Lightning charges, and most of you already know this, but I'll go over it anyway, give you a +1 bonus to attack rolls and deal an additional 1 lightning damage, essentially turning our Moonblade into a +2 weapon, which is amazing, with a bit of extra lightning damage, which just feels on theme. And if you gain 5 charges, which after 2 turns of standing on an electrified surface you'll have, all of those charges are consumed, and the next time you deal damage, you deal an additional 1d8, and you lose 1 charge per turn. But of course, we're going to be starting every one of our turns on an electrified surface, so we're going to constantly have lightning charges, and that electrified surface is going to be triggering reverberation to give us even more thunder damage, and another way to knock enemies prone, which is another way of getting advantage. Then Maelstrom is going to pull them in, knocking them prone, and dealing a bunch of damage, or Tidal Wave is going to knock them prone. Our enemies are just going to be on their arses for most of the combat, pretty much at all times. Next up, we have the Spine Shudder Amulet. Whenever the wearer makes a ranged spell attack, you inflict 2 reverberation on the target. This is just here for more reverberation if you feel like that's necessary, and felt like it made sense for the build, that any ranged spell attack that we cast is just going to reverberate with thunder. I mean, it just kind of makes sense. We are the Storm Lord. Chromatic Orb is one of the things this will work with, and there are a couple of extra spells here that it might work with, but actually our options are fairly limited with the things that we've taken here, so you might find that this may be better spent elsewhere. So feel free to swap this out for something else. Next up, Ring of Arcane Synergy. Once we dump the Diadem, we're still going to want to get Arcane Synergy in some way, and this is how we're going to do it. Basically, for the use of a cantrip, we gain Arcane Synergy for 2 turns. Well, you know what else is a cantrip? Booming Blade! So, by using Booming Blade, we're going to make our weapon attack stronger with Arcane Synergy, which also makes Booming Blade stronger. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy here. Booming Blade is going to be our main way of attacking. You are never clicking the swing the weapon button. You are always clicking Booming Blade. It is the better option. Next up, we also have the Sparks Wall. Because we are creating these electrocuted surfaces, and we decided not to take Water Walk in the end, we do need a way to prevent ourselves from becoming electrocuted on our own electrified water surfaces, which is what the Sparks Wall does. This does also give us resistance to lightning damage, but we do already have that. But so if you may feel like you want to maybe get a different ring slot for this build, then feel free to take the Water Walk spell. Again, it's a ritual. All it's costing is one of your prepared spell slots from Sorcerer. You don't actually need to and you don't actually need a spell slot for it, because again, it's a ritual. And that can actually be cast on multiple people too, so keep that in mind as well. But otherwise, the Sparks Wall is a great piece of equipment here, if you want to take more spells in general. Otherwise, swap this out and take Water Walk instead. All of the armor that you can see here has been coloured in the Elton dye, which gives us this kind of gold, blue, reddish-brown look, which just looks absolutely awesome, except for the boots, which were coloured in the Owl dye. Both of these come from the Faerunian Colours mod. So yes, a bit of a modded dye cosmetic here, but all of the actual equipment is vanilla. And that's it, that is the build, and what else can I say? It works like a charm. Yes, the lack of extra attack is a little bit annoying if you want to focus more on the melee side of things. However, with Booming Blade and Haste, if you do decide to use like the Darkfire Shortbow on this, which will give you permanent cold and fire resistance, as well as, you know, the ability to cast Haste once per long rest, and yada yada yada, you could definitely get a lot out of that. And obviously Haste would basically give you extra attack for both your weapon and your spells. You can cast multiple spells a turn as well, which is fucking broken. So overall, you've got a lot to work with there if you decide to go with Haste. I do recommend it on this build in some way or another, but I do think the Darkfire Shortbow is the better way of going about it, so I probably should have included it in this video. Oh well. But honestly, everything that we get here is so fun. Again, the idea of being this, like, conquering warlord who is a hero to his people but a nightmare to others, inflicting fear wherever he goes with psychic damage, but also being the Lord of the Storm, sailing the seven seas, going from nation to nation, just absolutely decimating everything in his way with lightning, thunder, and the sea itself through the new water magic, and even being devastating in combat both in melee and at rage. His very blade is embedded with the power of the thunder itself, as well as being able to do things like, Misty Step as well, to teleport around, becoming mist on the water as you walk. Oh, it's just so cool, man. Everything about this build just feels right. And it creates a cool story, a cool character with an interesting background, and just has an extremely powerful skill set. Again, I've used Storm builds before, and I've made some interesting ones, and I do think pretty much all of those builds benefit from the new Mistress Spells mod. So honestly, go back and check out the Storm Song and the Bloody Storm with these new spells, because mwah, it's brilliant. But yeah, I think that is going to do it for me. I don't have much more to say here overall, so I think I'm going to call it. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you all next time.